Today, I want to tell you why my wife and I carry a debit card that we never use. I also want to tell you about a way that you can manage your money to improve your savings rate. I think both of these topics can really help us be better with money in 2025. Good morning and welcome to the HopeFilled Financial Podcast. My name is Jay Disberger, your one and only HopeFilled Financial Coach, and I want to say first and foremost, Happy New Year. If you're listening to this episode the day it comes out, it's New Year's Eve 2024. Naturally, this is our last episode of the year, and I'm hoping it's going to be a really productive one, especially after the cringy, unusual story that I told last week for Christmas Eve. That was a little weird. It was a departure from what we normally do, but we're going to get back on track by talking about why my wife and I carry debit cards that we never use. And the reason why I'm picking this topic for today's story is because we're probably all thinking about our New Year's resolutions. What do we want to do to be better in 2025? This is related to a goal that my wife and I had to better protect ourselves when it comes to identity theft. Identity theft is not a matter of if, it's a matter of when in today's world. I myself, after Amanda and I got married, had my debit card compromised. I was fortunate enough to be affiliated with a bank that was able to catch the fact that my debit card was indeed compromised before any money was taken out of my account. But if you've been in this situation before, you know the bank has to cut your debit card off. They cancel it. They ask you to cut it up and they send you a new one. This takes time that you may not have if you have expenses that need to be processed prior to getting a new debit card. For me, fortunately, my wife had a debit card of her own to the same checking account that we were able to use for everything. I had to shift a lot of our auto payments off of my card over to hers for the time being. When that debit card got canceled, all the auto payments for all of my online bill pay things also got broken. So there was a little bit of footwork that needed done. But we were simply grateful we had an alternative means of payment. But this got us thinking, what if we're with a bank where we have our respective debit cards, but both get compromised and we can't engage with that checking account, or for some reason that checking account ends up being locked up for us. We can't access the money in it for any duration of time. What do we do for an emergency expense that needs to happen before the issue with the debit cards or the bank is resolved? This is a question you have to answer whether or not you agree with credit cards. If you have credit cards and you only had one credit card, you have the same issue here. You need a redundant source of payment, a redundant means of payment with plastic in today's world in case the first primary source fails on you or gets stolen. So we thought about it, and we have this debit card that's tied to our brokerage account where we have taxable investments. We said, well, why don't we just start carrying that around for each of us and having some liquid cash sitting in that account, just enough to make an emergency payment. Say, fill up both cars or go buy 1 week's worth of groceries. That's how much money we keep there in case our primary card gets compromised for any reason. I don't personally see a reason to have anything more redundant than a secondary source, but if it makes you feel more comfortable to have a primary, a secondary, and then a third option, by all means, do what gives you peace, what helps you sleep at night. I feel like we already have a third option since my wife and I both have debit cards for our checking, and we both have separate debit cards for that brokerage account. It's a joint account for both, in both cases. So we've got that level of redundancy built in that's enough for us. And even though I already brought up credit cards in this conversation, I want to make sure you hear me on this point. If you're the kind of person who wants to carry a debit card, but you're scared because those who are credit card only fanatics will argue that it's too dangerous just to have your debit card. Because if something happened to it, you wouldn't be able to access your money. You need a redundant source. They'll tell you that redundant source should be a credit card. Sure, you could have a credit card for emergencies here. I'm not a credit card person. I would much rather have a redundant bank account or a redundant debit card tied to the same checking account before having a credit card for that emergency. Having multiple credit cards for the diversity of payment sources, if one's canceled or one's not accepted somewhere, or one for any reason stops working, is the same sort of situation with the debit cards that I just explained. We're solving the same issue with similar yet different tools. Now, it's funny, ever since we set this redundancy into the way we manage money, we've never had to use it. And I pray we never have to. But it's there just in case, just like insurance, just like identity theft protection. And it helps us sleep better at night. Before we move into the main topic, please tell me if you've thought about this sort of thing below, if you have a different approach to solve this issue, or if today's story is inspiring you to make a change in 2025. Now it's time for today's main topic. Our main topic today is going to be covering a process for managing your money that can work kind of separately from a budget, but definitely in conjunction with a budget to help you improve your savings rate. It's something that was shared with me by a friend of mine who's a financial professional in Kansas. His name is Chris White. I'll put a link in the description below if you wanted to contact him to talk about this process. But before we dive into that, I want to give you a little bit of a housekeeping update on the podcast. We are not going to be producing a show next week for Tuesday. We're taking a little bit of a break so that we can focus on the programming and focus on making content that produces the most value for you. So if you don't want to miss when we come back, please subscribe to the show and follow us. Follow HopeFilled Financial Coaching, the HopeFilled Financial Podcast on Facebook or Twitter. I'll put links to the Facebook and the Twitter in the description below. Okay, let's get into the process that can help you improve your savings rate here in 2025. Okay, I've run into it where I'm working with a couple or an individual who has a hard time with budgeting because the way they've managed money historically, their natural mode of thinking about money is to open up their online checking, look at the amount that's in the checking account, and say, I still have money. I can afford X number of things to spend. They're looking at the snapshot in time without really taking in the context of all the spending that has or hasn't happened this month, as you would be doing in a written budget that you're keeping up to date throughout the month. And that might be you. That might be your main mode of operating. The difficulty here is you might be spending money that had you written a budget, you've already spent on paper, on purpose in advance. So you could be writing a budget, and if you're not tracking the budget and looking there to see if you have money, but you're looking at the number in your checking account, you're going to find it very hard to stick to a budget. You're going to be able to deviate from that budget without knowing that you've done so. And to exacerbate the issue, you might have direct deposit running straight to that checking account so that anytime payday hits, it fills up and you feel like you have some free spending money, even when you don't. I'm going to pause here and talk about the way that I have traditionally understood the process for managing money as it flows into my possession and then out through spending, saving, and giving. I write a monthly budget. It's no shocker to those who follow the show for a while that my wife and I keep a monthly budget. We haven't missed a single month since we've been married over 5 years ago. We like doing the budget because we're able to use it as our basis to intentionally spend, save, and give. We're able to exercise frugality to its fullest by assigning every dollar a mission and then following through with it. And in our checking account, we keep a buffer, if you will, that is roughly equal to our monthly income. That way, we're kind of a month ahead. We're budgeting the money that largely lives in there at the start of the month and how it's going to go out. We have the direct deposit coming back in to the checking account, so that balance does go up and down. Neither of us are checking the checking account to see if we can spend on something in particular. We're looking at the budget. However, because we're looking at the budget, we're able to get close to the end of the month. We've already done this actually for December 2024. We look at where the bank account is, and we know that it needs to end at the same value where it began for it to be a zero-based budget. All of the spending, saving, and giving is equal to the income. The inflow for the month is equal to the outflow. And the outflow isn't all spending, right? There's saving in there. And that saving can include investing. So what we're doing is we're looking at where we spent. There might be some overspending. We're not perfect. We do overspend the budget. And we will then transfer the money from checking to savings or any investments at the end of the month, leaving the initial same balance to begin the budget for the following month. So we have a lump sum that is roughly equal to our budget. The direct deposit comes in throughout the month. Our spending and our giving go out. And at the end of the month, we move more or less what's left over to savings, but it's what we had planned to move to savings almost every month. But if you look at the phone, if you look at your online checking, you look at the browser, you see a number and you feel like you can spend. This process is frustrating to you, and your natural inclinations are going to fight against it, and you might simply give up out of frustration and a lack of hope. So this process that I'm going to introduce here flips this on its head. What if we had the direct deposit go to a savings account that's not tied to a debit card? And from that savings account, we decide how much we can spend, save, and give, move the money for spending and giving out, and work from there. And what if we scheduled that outflow so that it could happen on a weekly basis? We have a little bit of a buffer in our checking account or checking accounts where we're spending from and giving from. But it helps us see a number that's more reflective of what we actually have, because we've already kept what we needed to save in the savings account. And we're not seeing that inrush on our checking account balance, making us feel like we can simply go spend a little bit more than we actually can afford. And when it comes to the money that's outflowing from the savings account where the direct deposit goes in, we could have it go to one checking account where all the spending and giving goes out. Or we could split it up into two checking accounts. This would, if you use debit cards, solve the problem that we mentioned in the story. You could have one account for needs, absolute needs, your essentials. You can have another account for your wants, for the fun spending money. And you can have a rough idea of what your needs are going to be. So you move the same amount for the needs in a consistent, predictable way. And you're intentionally putting only what you can freely spend on the wants in the account with the wants. You could also do it where there's your spending and your giving. You could get as granular with this as you want. Depends on how many accounts you want to manage. I would keep it simple. I wouldn't use more than 2 or 3 accounts if I were using this method. And I think it's definitely worth a try. And I wish I could take credit for this process on the whole. Again, it was inspired and shared with me by my friend Chris White. Chris White is a financial advisor working in Kansas, and he's working with a company called Currents. Their website is livecurrents.com. They do not sponsor this show. Chris does not sponsor this show. I was simply impressed by this process and how it can help people change their habits by changing their process for money to match their natural inclinations. Currents, I believe, makes their money by being a banking alternative that's tied to an app that helps you manage your money in the way that I just explained. And they link up their app with financial professionals so that the financial professionals can help individuals who have an improved savings rate figure out what to do with the money that's in that savings account that should now continue to grow better than it otherwise could have. Chris, I know you watch the show. If I'm wrong about that, feel free to correct me in the comments. And if you are interested in connecting with Chris, again, I've got a link in the description that will allow you to schedule a 15-minute conversation with Chris where he can tell you about Currents and maybe help you out with that. I'm not sponsored again. I'm simply trying to share a resource with you if this is something that is interesting and you believe helpful to you. For me personally, if I had heard this on a show from someone like me, I'd try to go out there and engage with the process myself first. And if I found that it was a struggle and I needed something that streamlined the process, put it all in one place, allowed me to maybe engage with this in a more effective way, even if it costs some money, I might try it then. I'd try to DIY it first and then go in. I don't know how much Currents cost to engage with, and I'm not endorsing them. I do like this process that was inspired by them, and I want to give credit where credit's due. If you have any experience with Currents and you want to share it with us, I'd love to see that in the comments below. I'd also like to see any future show ideas in the comments below, things that you're interested in seeing me cover in 2025. I'm going to be spending probably at least 2 months working through the programming and getting some episodes recorded in advance. I tried throughout 2024 to stay 1 month ahead of all my recording. And I tell you what, for the last like 4 or 5 months, we have been barely keeping up by getting the recording in the week before. It's been a little stressful on the schedule, so we need to take a breather. We need to take a break. My wife needs a break from the editing, and we need to really focus back in on how to make the best quality podcast for you and do it in a way that isn't an undue burden on us. So I can't say until next week, until next Tuesday, because I'm not going to be back next week. I will be back. I promise I will be back eventually. And maybe I'll take the opportunity to get some new bow ties, change it up on the show a little bit there. So until I'm back, until the podcast is rolling again, I do sincerely hope and pray that you budget bravely and that you, in 2025, get to enjoy your hope-filled financial future. Thank you, and Happy New Year.